What if I told you that the most powerful thing you can do right now is nothing? No texts, no calls, no late night explanations, just one quiet decision. And suddenly, he can't stop thinking about you. You see, it's not the silence alone that drives him crazy. It's what happens in that silence. When he expects you to wait, and instead, you evolve. When he looks for your attention and finds peace. You stop feeding his ego, you stop chasing clarity, and you start glowing in your own lane. That shift from emotional availability to empowered indifference triggers something deep in his mind. He doesn't just wonder where you went, he starts questioning what he lost. You've removed his comfort zone. You're not cold, you're just done waiting. And that, more than anything, makes you unforgettable. Because the second you stop orbiting his world, you become the mystery he can't crack. And the woman he never thought would walk away. No words, no drama, just silence and self-respect. That's what he never saw coming and what he won't be able to forget. Because when you stop waiting, he starts losing his mind. You know what really gets under someone's skin? What really leaves a mark? Makes them question everything and starts that spiral of, oh, what did I do? Is not an angry text. Is not a dramatic phone call or a long emotional message. It's silence, paired with self-elevation. That's the key. It's not just going quiet. It's what happens during that quiet that makes all the difference. See, silence on its own can be mistaken for a game. But when it's silence backed by your growth, your glow up, your happiness, that's what hits different. That's what gets in his head, because now it's not just that you're not talking to him. It's that you're thriving without talking to him. You're showing, without saying a word, that you are no longer in orbit around his validation. And that realization shakes the foundation he's been standing on. What most people don't realize is how powerful contrast is. When someone's used to you being available, texting good morning, checking in, responding right away, when they've grown used to you filling the space, and then suddenly nothing. But alongside that, you're shining in your own life. That contrast is a shock. That contrast triggers the very thing he's been trying to avoid, self-awareness. Because now your absence isn't just empty, it's full of everything he lost. You don't even have to rub it in. You don't have to make some big statement. In fact, the less you explain, the more powerful it becomes. The more he has to sit with the unknown. Did she move on? Did she meet someone else? Why isn't she trying to fix things? Why is she glowing while I'm still trying to make sense of this distance? Silence, when paired with visible growth, becomes the most deafening sound he'll ever hear. You're not doing it to punish. You're doing it to protect your peace. Because chasing someone who's unsure about you is the fastest way to lose yourself. And in the moment you stop chasing, when you choose stillness instead of performance, you regain your power. That's when the energy starts to shift. And here's where it gets interesting. That silence of yours, it starts creating noise in his head. He replays old conversations. He rereads texts. He checks your social media more than he'd like to admit. Every story you post, every photo you share, it becomes a window into your world. One he's no longer part of. And the more you look like you're doing just fine, maybe even better, the more that narrative in his head starts to unravel. You become a mystery again. Not because you're hiding, but because you're no longer trying to be seen. He expected you to react. He expected you to reach out, to hold on, to ask for clarity. But you didn't. Instead, you disappeared. Not in bitterness, but in evolution. And now, he's the one left trying to decode the silence. The truth is, when you remove your attention, your time, your effort, it becomes obvious just how much you were giving. He begins to see the emotional investment you made. And because he's no longer getting it, he starts to crave it. That craving is what brings the regret. That regret is what brings the obsession. And that obsession is what keeps you living rent-free in his mind. But none of this works if you're just sitting in silence hoping he'll notice. That's not power. That's passive waiting. What works is becoming unavailable. Because you're busy building, busy healing, busy laughing with friends, investing in yourself, taking back your mornings and nights, falling in love with your own life again. That's the part that truly gets to him. Not just that you're quiet, but that you no longer need to be heard by him. He starts to question everything. Was she really the one? Did I misread her value? Why did I take her presence for granted? And the most haunting question of all, what if she never comes back? That's the weight your silence carries. Not because it's loud, but because it's authentic. You didn't pull back as a strategy. You pulled back because you finally saw your own worth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So don't underestimate the power of being unavailable, not out of spite, but out of purpose. Because when you stop giving him access to the version of you he took for granted, you give him space to feel the emptiness that access used to fill. You don't chase, you rise, and that rise is what echoes in his mind long after the silence began. There's a moment when you stop and realize you've been feeding his ego far more than you ever intended. Every time you reached out just to check in, every time you double texted because he hadn't replied yet, every time you made excuses for his inconsistency, you weren't just communicating, you were handing over pieces of your power, one message at a time. And it's not about blame. We've all done it. We've all tried to keep the connection alive in the hope that something will click, that maybe if we just show up a little more, care a little louder, give just one more chance, he'll finally see what's right in front of him. But here's the brutal truth. The more you give without receiving, the less value he places on what you offer. What most people don't understand is that a man doesn't obsess over the woman who constantly reminds him she's there. He obsesses over the one who doesn't, the one who stops showing up when she's unappreciated, the one who doesn't hand him unlimited access to her thoughts, her time, her emotional energy. Because when that access is revoked, when the supply stops, he feels it deeply. Suddenly, he's not being reassured every few days that you're still on the hook. Suddenly, there's no more emotional feeding coming from your end. Suddenly, there's no more emotional feeding coming from your end. And for someone used to receiving that kind of emotional nutrition from you, that's a jolt. That's withdrawal. You see, silence on its own doesn't create impact. It's silence after generosity that does. When he's gotten used to you caring, initiating, asking how he's doing, making him feel important, and then all of that stops, it creates a psychological gap that messes with him. And here's what's even more powerful. It doesn't need to be angry silence. It doesn't need to come with some dramatic announcement or bitter final text. In fact, it's more effective when it doesn't, because quiet confidence says what words never could. I'm no longer available for breadcrumbs. I'm not begging. I'm not warning you. I'm just done participating in a dynamic that doesn't value me. When you remove yourself without explanation, you leave him with something far more powerful than closure. You leave him with questions he has to sit with. And this is where the shift happens. He starts replaying old conversations. He starts thinking about whether he said something wrong, whether he pushed too far, whether you met someone else. His mind starts filling in blanks. And while he's busy searching for signs of what went wrong, you're just out there living your life, redirecting your energy to places that give something back to you. Now, this is where most people break. They go a few days or a week without contact and then panic. They worry they're losing him. They worry he'll forget them. So they reach out again just to get a pulse. Hey, how have you been? And boom, all the progress is gone. That moment of silence that was starting to do the work, reset. You've just restarted the cycle of him taking you for granted. You've reminded him, once again, that you're always going to come back, always going to chase, always going to be there when he's ready. But the real transformation, the one that flips the script completely, happens when you don't break, when you don't text, when you don't call, when you don't look for signs or excuses to reopen the door. That's when he starts to feel the discomfort of his own actions. He starts to realize that the person he thought would always be there actually might not be. And if you're sitting there thinking, but what if he doesn't care? What if he just moves on and never reaches out again? Good. Let that possibility exist. Because if a man can lose access to you, to your time, your love, your heart, and feel nothing, then why on earth would you ever want him to stay? You don't want to manipulate a reaction out of someone. You want to reveal the truth of their investment. And sometimes the only way to do that is by pulling away completely. The most attractive thing you can do isn't to beg someone to see your worth. It's to recognize your worth so clearly that you stop offering it to people who treat it like it's optional. You stop giving energy to someone who only engages when it's convenient. And when you do that, when you break the cycle of feeding his ego and start feeding your own soul instead, something shifts. And in that, you can start to feed your soul and to feed your own soul instead. He doesn't just miss you. He realizes what he lost. And that realization, it haunts him in a way your words never could. Because the version of you who knows her value, who walks away without needing validation, who doesn't scream, doesn't cry, doesn't beg, just disappears quietly and builds an extraordinary life. That woman, she's unforgettable. When someone expects a reaction and gets silence, it sends a message far louder than any words ever could. That moment when you choose not to respond, not out of spite or manipulation, but out of a deep sense of self-worth, that's when the shift begins. We tend to think that silence is passive, that not texting back or not calling makes us weak or makes us look like we don't care. But real silence, when it's coming from a place of clarity, is one of the most powerful forms of communication. See, most people are addicted to a pattern. One person pulls away, the other rushes to close the gap. One becomes distant, the other becomes anxious. And the person who stays calm the longest tends to hold all the power. But when you finally decide not to play that game anymore, not because you're trying to win, but because your peace has become more valuable than proving anything, the rules change. He starts to notice the gap you're no longer trying to fill. That emotional space you always used to occupy with your attention, your energy, your love, suddenly it's empty. And that emptiness is deafening. You might think silence just goes unnoticed, that if you don't reach out, he won't even care. But that's rarely the case, especially when he's used to you being the one who shows up, who texts first, who asks if everything's okay. He's used to you filling in all the blanks. He's used to knowing that even when things were off, you were still emotionally tethered to him. But when that tether is cut, when he feels that you're not just quiet, but emotionally unavailable, something primal kicks in. And here's the twist. It's not about making him panic. It's about showing yourself that you don't need to perform for someone's attention anymore, that your value doesn't hinge on their validation. Because the moment you no longer need him to respond, the moment your peace becomes non-negotiable, that is when you become the one in control, not of him, but of yourself. That's the moment your energy shifts from reactive to magnetic. Indifference is not about pretending you don't care. It's not about acting cold or closed off. It's about no longer feeling the urge to fight for clarity from someone who isn't offering it. It's the confidence to let the silence speak for itself. And believe me, it does. Because when someone expects an emotional reaction and gets none, their mind doesn't go to peace. It goes to confusion. It goes to self-doubt. It goes to, wait, did I lose her? Did I push her too far? Most people are used to playing with fire without getting burned. They're used to emotional safety nets. They're used to you being there even after they've pulled away. But when you no longer flinch at their absence, when you can breathe just fine in the silence, they realize the game's over. And that's when he starts to lose his mind. Not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. Not because you begged for attention, but because you reclaimed it. That space you create when you step back is powerful. It forces him to sit with what he's done or not done. Or done is not about giving him the silent treatment. It's about giving yourself the gift of silence, of space, of perspective. And while you're doing that, he's left to figure out what changed. Why the woman who used to be so accessible now seems emotionally unavailable. Why the one who used to need reassurance suddenly seems self-assured. And this shift doesn't just affect how he sees you, it affects how you see yourself. You start realizing that your worth doesn't depend on how often someone reaches out or how fast they text back. You remember how much peace comes from choosing not to engage with chaos. That's the beauty of true indifference. It's not about proving anything. It's about protecting your emotional energy. It's about letting go of the need to manage someone else's feelings or chase clarity that never arrives. When you stop needing his attention to feel secure, something in you changes. You stop being reactive. You stop dancing for scraps. And the irony? That's usually the moment he starts paying the most attention because he can't feel your grip anymore. He doesn't have the safety net. He's alone with the silence. And it's far more confronting than any angry message or emotional plea. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. No texts, no calls, no chasing, just peace, just presence, just the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth and doesn't need to explain it. Let the silence do what your words never could. You don't need a dramatic exit. You don't need to announce you're pulling away. You don't need a long message about how you're done trying or how disappointed you are. Sometimes the most powerful move is the quietest one. The moment you feel yourself begging for bread